the day humans left the Galactic Council, was the day the universe changed forever. Nobody noticed when the human ships stopped filing their routes. That was the thing about it. There was no explosion, no war, no final broadcast cutting across every frequency with some grand declaration. The humans just stopped. And because they had always done their work quietly in the in-between places in the margins of the official record, the galaxy did not notice for a while. It noticed the way you notice a tooth is gone, not when it leaves, but the first time your tongue finds the empty space where it used to be. It started with a smell. That was what Counselor Rien of the Cythery remembered most years later, when people asked her about the day it all began. Not the vote, not the chamber, the smell. She had been sitting 3 rows behind the senior block when the result came in, 41-1, and the recycled air of the Grand Hall on Vareth Prime had carried something strange to her. Something she could not name then and could barely name later. The closest she ever got was this. It smelled like a door closing in a room you had already left. The human at the center table was a man named Adet. Not young, not old. Wide shoulders, close-cropped hair going white at the temples, the kind of hands that had done physical work at some point in their life. He had been the human deputy ambassador for 11 years, filling in that day because the senior ambassador was handling something in another system, something the delegation had considered more important than a vote they already knew they were going to lose. That detail would come up later in the political retrospectives. Humans had not even sent their senior person. They had known what was coming and decided it did not require their full attention. When the vote locked in, Adet did not stand right away. He finished writing something in the small notebook he kept on the table, the physical kind with actual paper, which several human delegates carried and which other species found slightly theatrical. He clicked the pen closed, put it in his jacket pocket. Then he stood and he spoke. He did not protest the vote. He did not list the contributions of humanity to the Council's history. He did not threaten consequences or invoke emergency clauses or request a delay for further deliberation. He said, "We have heard the Council's position. We will now communicate ours." Then he left. No folder on the table, no formal adjournment request. The chair was empty before anyone fully processed that he had stood up. The rest of the human staff left the building within the hour. Not running, not making a scene. They moved through the corridors of Vareth Prime the way people move when they have already decided something, and the only thing left is the walking. Security logs later showed that every human access card in the building went inactive at exactly 14:32 station time, which meant the exit had been coordinated before the session even started. Council Chair Ron made a brief statement afterward. He said the human delegation had made a political choice the Council respected, and that he expected normal communications to resume within the week once the diplomatic posturing had run its course. He said humans had always had a flair for drama. He said this with the mild amusement of someone who had managed difficult species before and was not particularly worried. That evening, Counselor Rien went back to her small office on the station's residential level and sat at her desk for a long time without turning on the light. She had voted yes on Resolution 77. She still believed it was probably the correct vote for the reasons she had been given, but the smell of that room stayed with her. She pulled up the human delegation's public schedule. It had been wiped, not archived, wiped. The entry for today's session was the last item marked simply "Concluded." She tried to access the routine human patrol confirmation logs that pass through the monitoring system every 48 hours. The last one was dated 3 days ago. The next one had not come. When she checked, the human reporting nodes were not offline. They were not returning errors. They were just not there. Like something had reached into the network and quietly unplugged itself, port by port, so carefully that the surrounding systems had not even registered the disconnection. Just empty space where the signal used to be. Rien stared at that for a long time. She had voted yes because humans were too loud, too present, too difficult to manage. They pushed into conversations they had not been invited into, maintained operations in sectors that had not been assigned to them, and generally behaved like the galaxy was a project they had personal responsibility for rather than a shared political space with established lanes of authority. She had voted yes because she believed humans needed to be reminded of their place. Now she was sitting in the dark looking at a monitoring system that had just shown her, without any drama at all, that when humans removed themselves from a space they had been occupying, what they left behind was not a vacuum. It was a shape, the exact shape of everything they had been doing. And it was very large. She turned the light on. She opened a new document. She did not know yet what she was going to write, but she had the feeling that in about 60 days, somebody was going to need to explain this to a council that had stopped being able to understand it. She wanted to be the one who had started thinking early. Outside the station's hull, the star lanes ran in every direction, and the human ships that used to move through them were gone. The space they left behind was not empty. It was waiting, in the specific way that only a space shaped like a missing thing can wait. The first species to actually feel the absent was not one of the powerful ones. It was the Murath. The Murath were small, in every sense that word could mean. Small population, small territory, small voice in council chambers. They lived on 2 colony worlds in a region called the Heth Belt, a stretch of space that sat between established trade lanes and therefore received neither the traffic of a major corridor nor the attention of a protected zone. They had been council members for 40 years, and in that time had spoken at the main podium exactly twice, both times to request infrastructure funding they did not receive. What they did have was a water processing problem. For 6 years, a rotating team of human engineers had been visiting the Murath's second colony every 90 days to service a desalination system that the colony's own technicians could not fully maintain. The system was old, built before Murath joined the council, designed for a different planet's mineral composition. The human engineers had adapted it 4 times over the years, improvising solutions each visit, leaving behind handwritten notes in both Murath and Standard Galactic about what they had changed and why. The colony's administrator, a Murath elder named Sas, had at various points tried to file paperwork through the council to have the arrangement formalized and funded. The paperwork had never cleared. The humans had kept coming anyway. 92 days after the vote, the team did not arrive. Sas waited 2 weeks before contacting the council logistics office. She was told the human engineering roster was not currently active within council operational frameworks and that she should submit a new service request through the standard infrastructure queue. The queue had an 18-month processing estimate. The desalination system began showing pressure irregularities on day 30 after the missed visit. By day 50, 2 of the secondary filtration units had failed. The colony's water output dropped by 34%. SAS rationed what they had, moved non-essential personnel to the first colony, and submitted the service request. She also wrote a personal message to the human engineering contact she had been working with for 4 years, a man named Rolf who had bad knees and always brought the same brand of instant coffee and knew the desalination system better than anyone alive. Rolf replied within a day. He was sorry. He was not operating under council sanction anymore. He could not make the trip officially. He asked if she had kept his maintenance notes. She said she had every note he had ever left. He said he would walk her through it by remote. It would not be the same as being there, but they could try. They spent 11 days on long-distance communication, Rolf talking, Sas's technicians working, the time delay making every exchange slow and careful. At one point, Rolf stayed connected for 19 hours straight across the lag, talking a junior technician through a repair sequence in real time, sleeping in 2-hour intervals in his chair. When the primary filtration unit came back online, the junior technician made a sound that Rolf described later as the most relieved noise he had ever heard from any living being. The colony's water output recovered to 81%, not full capacity, but enough. Sauce sent the council a formal account of the incident. She included the maintenance logs, the communication transcripts, the 18-month Q estimate, and one additional note. She said that a private human engineer, operating with no council authorization and no compensation, had spent 11 days keeping her colony's water supply alive. She said she was not submitting this as a complaint. She was submitting it as a record, because she believed records of this kind should exist somewhere official, even if official channels had not been the ones to create the situation in the first place. The account was filed and acknowledged. Councillor Rien found it 3 weeks later while working through the infrastructure submissions she had been reviewing since the night of the vote. She had been building something, slowly, a document she had started that evening when she noticed the shape of the human absence in the patrol logs. She added the Murath water incident to it. Then she cross-referenced the colony's location against historical human patrol routes and found that the Hethbelt had been a quiet regular stop for 2 human vessels for 9 years, vessels that had never filed a formal patrol justification, because the belt was not in any designated patrol zone. She pulled the records of both vessels. One had been doing it since the belt had a piracy incident a decade ago that the council's response had reached too slowly. The ship's captain had apparently decided to start passing through regularly. No order, no assignment, just a decision made by one person that became a habit that became, quietly, a kind of protection. Both vessels were now registered to a private human carrier, operating outside council space. Rien sat with that for a while, then she kept building her document. It was getting long. She was starting to understand why. Somewhere in the Hethbelt, a junior Murath technician was reading through a stack of handwritten maintenance notes and learning, for the first time, exactly how the system that kept her colony alive actually worked. Rolf had written everything down. Of course he had. Humans always wrote everything down, as if they had always known on some level that they might not always be there to explain it in person. The report that broke things open did not come from a counselor. It came from a poet. His name was Asen, and he was Keithrani, and he had never intended to write anything political in his life. The Keithrani were a broad, gray-skinned people with a strong oral tradition, and Asen was known in his home system as someone who wrote long observation pieces, the kind that described ordinary things in careful detail until the ordinary thing became something else. He had been on Vareth Prime for a residency program run through the council's cultural exchange office, the kind of program nobody paid much attention to because it did not produce anything useful. He had been paying attention. For 4 months, from a small desk in the cultural exchange office on the station's 3rd level, Asen had been watching. He watched how the station worked. He watched who fixed what. He watched the freight patterns and the maintenance schedules, and the people who moved through the corridors at unusual hours doing things that nobody had sent them to do. He had come to write about the texture of galactic civic life. What he found was that a very large portion of that texture was human. He wrote a piece that was 6,000 words long and published it through a small Keithrani literary journal that had maybe 4,000 subscribers. He did not write it as a political document. He wrote it the way he wrote everything, by describing what he had actually seen in specific detail without editorializing. He described a human station technician named Whale who came in 2 hours before her shift every day to run informal diagnostics on systems that were not in her assigned section, because she had noticed 6 months ago that the official inspection cycle was too slow to catch certain failure patterns before they became expensive. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody was paying her for the extra hours. She did it because, as she told Asen when he asked, The systems needed it, and she was there. He described a human diplomatic aide who had been spending his lunch breaks for 3 years providing informal translation support to out-here petitioners who could not afford licensed translators for their council submissions. The aide's out-here was imperfect. He kept a small notebook of phrases he needed to look up. The petitioners got their documents filed. He described a human cargo pilot named Bay who had been running an unofficial courier route for 7 years between 2 Murath research stations that the council mail system did not connect because the route was not cost-effective. Bay charged cost of fuel plus a small percentage. The researchers could afford it. The letters, the samples, the data drives, the small packages of home food that researchers send each other when they are far from home, all of it moved because one person decided the route was worth flying. He described the maintenance notes left behind at a water treatment station in the Heth Belt, handwritten in 2 languages, so detailed that a technician who had never met the person who wrote them could follow the logic of every decision. He wrote, "These are not heroic acts. I want to be clear about that. I am not describing heroes. I am describing people who looked at a gap and stepped into it because the gap was there and they were there, and it did not occur to them to wait for someone to formalize the arrangement first. The galaxy is full of such gaps. I had not understood before I came here how many of them had a human shape." The piece had 4,000 readers on the first day. By the end of the week, it had been translated into 29 languages and shared across 11 species networks. An out-here media collective republished it in full with a note saying it was the most accurate description of something they had been feeling, but could not articulate since the day the Veth corridor closed. Councillor Rien read it in one sitting. She added it to her document, which was by now very long indeed. She had been building it in private for months, but reading Asen's piece made her understand that what she had been building was not a political analysis. It was a case. She requested a meeting with the new council chair, a steady Keithrani councillor named Mara who had taken the position after Ron stepped down under significant pressure. Rien brought the document, which was now 200 pages, and Asen's piece, and the Murath Water Incident Report, and a summary of 34 other situations she had found through cross-referencing the human absence against historical operational logs. Mara read for 2 hours without speaking. Then she looked up and said 3 words. "How did this happen?" Rien said she thought it happened slowly and quietly, and in a direction nobody had thought to look, because the people doing it had never asked anyone to look. She said that was probably the most honest answer she had. Mara said they needed to fix it. Rien said she was not sure fixing was the right word. She said what they needed to do was harder than fixing. They needed to ask something, and they needed to be prepared for the answer to be no. Mara asked what the question was. Rien said they had to ask humanity to come back, not to what the council had been, to something the council had not figured out how to be yet, and they had to ask it in a way that admitted what had happened, clearly and without softening it, or any answer they got would not hold. There was a long silence. Somewhere in the station, a human technician who no longer worked there had left behind a small note taped to the inside of a maintenance panel on the water recycling system, written in standard galactic and Cytheri both, explaining what the bypass switch did and when to use it and what to check afterward. It had been there for 2 years. Nobody had found it yet. But someone would. The Dran did not attack important places first. That was what made it hard to respond to quickly. They hit the edges, the small depots, the relay waypoints, the minor colonies that existed in the spaces between the things that showed up on the council's priority maps. They hit places that nobody had a standing agenda item about, places that only became important once they were gone. The council had been debating a formal response framework for 19 days when the Dran reached a place called Outpost Zero. Zero was not on any council priority map. It was a mixed-species rest and resupply station on the outer edge of the Heth Belt, run by a collective of independent operators from 4 different species. About 600 people lived and worked there on any given cycle. It had 2 small defensive guns and a communications relay that connected it to the nearest major station, 14 hours away at standard transit speed. What Zero also had, though nobody in the council chamber knew this at the time, was a woman named Tula. Tula was human. She had been running cargo in that region for 12 years and had stopped at Zero so many times that she knew the name of the cook's daughter and which docking bay had the faulty pressure seal, and where the station manager hid the good tea. She had been between runs when the Dran fleet appeared on the long-range sensors. She was sitting in the station's small commissary, eating something that had been described to her as noodles, but was really just noodles in spirit, when the alarm went off. The Dran fleet was 5 ships. The station's defenses were not going to hold them. The nearest council response vessel was, at that moment, 17 hours away, because the formal response framework had not yet been finalized and the vessel had not been formally dispatched. Tula went to the docking bay. Her ship was a mid-range freighter called the Zero's Own, which she had named after the station as a joke years ago and then forgotten to change. It had no weapons except 2 point defense turrets designed for debris, not combat. She had a crew of 3. She opened her comms to every channel that was listening and said she was going to buy time and that she needed every ship at the station that could move to form up with her, armed or not, because numbers were numbers and the Dran liked easy targets. 4 ships answered: a Murath fishing hauler, an HFY supply runner, a beat-up Keithrani personal transport with an elderly couple aboard who said they had lived long enough that they would rather do something than watch, and 1 old council survey drone, remote-piloted by a 19-year-old station technician named Pell who had never flown anything in combat and was shaking hard enough that the drone's controls were registering microcorrections every half-second. 5 ships against 5 Dran raiders. What happened next was described later by 3 different witnesses in 3 different ways. The Keithrani couple said it looked like chaos. Pell said it looked like someone had taught chaos to dance. The HFY supply runner's captain said it looked like a woman who had been in enough bad situations to know that the first goal was not to win. It was to make the other side uncertain. Tula flew her freighter directly at the lead Dran ship on an intercept course, close enough that a collision was credible, and when the Dran vessel broke pattern to avoid her, she put the other 4 ships into the gap it left. The Murath hauler fouled the Dran's sensor field by broadcasting on every frequency it had. Pell's drone flew in tight loops around the second Dran ship, too small and erratic to hit cleanly and annoying enough to pull its attention. The Keithrani transport sat directly behind the station's comm relay and retransmitted the Dran's targeting signals back at them with a half-second delay that made their own systems report ghost contacts. None of this would have worked against a prepared fleet expecting resistance, but the Dran had come expecting a soft target, easy prey, the kind of place that went quiet when they arrived. Zero did not go quiet. The Dran held their position for 2 hours, probing, trying to find a clean approach, and could not. Then their fleet commander made the calculation that the mathematics of raiding operate on. This was costing more than it was worth. They pulled back. The council response vessel arrived 11 hours after the Dran left. Its commander filed a report that described finding the station intact, lightly damaged, and operational. He noted that a civilian fleet of 5 vessels appeared to have deterred a Dran raiding party. He said his assessment was that the deterrence had been effective, but was unlikely to succeed against a larger or more committed force. He did not know what to file the incident under. The form did not have a category for 5 civilian ships, and 1 shaking 19-year-old defeating a raider fleet through misdirection and stubbornness. He created a new category. He called it unclassified human action. He suspected it was not going to be the last time he needed it. Tula went back to her noodles. They were cold. She ate them anyway. On Vareth Prime, Counselor Rien added Outpost Zero to her document. She had stopped being surprised by these additions. That, she thought, was probably the most important thing her document had taught her so far. The moment you stopped being surprised by the list was the moment you understood how long the list had always been. Council Chair Mara did not send a diplomat to find Ade. She went herself. This was unusual enough that the news of it moved through Vareth Prime before she had even left the docking bay. Council chairs did not make personal visits to request meetings. They sent delegations. They issued formal invitations through established channels. They did not book transit on a mid-range courier vessel with 2 aides and no ceremonial staff, and travel for 9 hours to a station in the Orin cluster, where the former human deputy ambassador had apparently been living quietly for the past 7 months. The Orin cluster station was called Depot Veth, which was a name that had nothing to do with the Veth corridor, and everything to do with the fact that the station's founders had run out of ideas. It was a working station, fuel and freight and repairs, the kind of place where nobody dressed formally, and the primary social space was a wide open hall that served food at all hours and kept its lights at a comfortable medium because the clientele worked every shift. It smelled like machine oil and whatever the kitchen was making, which on the day Mara arrived was something that produced a warm, slightly sweet smell she did not recognize. Ade was at a corner table with a cup of something hot and a pile of paper documents he was sorting through. He was thinner than in his official council photos. He looked like someone who had been sleeping better. He saw Mara come in. He did not stand. He watched her cross the room, sit down across from him without being invited, and set nothing on the table between them. No folder, no prepared document, nothing. He said, "You came alone." She said, "I brought 2 people, but yes." He said, "That is not how the council asks for things." She said, "I know, that is why I did it this way." He looked at her for a moment. Then he set down the papers and gave her his full attention, which was, she would think later, a very human thing to do. No hedging. No calculated body language. Just attention, complete and immediate, as if he had decided she had earned it by getting on the transport. She told him about Rien's document. She told him about the Murath water station and Rolf's remote repair. She told him about Asen's piece and how it had moved through the network. She told him about Outpost Zero and Tula and the 5 ships and the 19-year-old and the cold noodles, because Rien had included that detail in her report, and Mara had decided it was the most important sentence in the whole file. Ade listened. He already knew most of it. Humans talk to each other. When she was done, he said, "What is it you are actually asking?" She said she was asking humans to come back, not to the council as it had been, to something they were still figuring out how to build. She said the honest version of it was this. The council had voted to make humans smaller and discovered that what humans had been doing did not get smaller with them. It stayed. It kept being necessary. And the council did not know how to do it, and humans were still doing it anyway. And she thought the civilized thing, the actually civilized thing, was to stop pretending the arrangement was not happening and start building it into something that worked correctly. Ade was quiet for a while. Then he said, "The 41 who voted yes, are they still on the council?" She said most of them were. He said, "Do they know you are here?" She said yes. She said it had not been a comfortable conversation. She said she had told them that the choice was between a formal agreement they did not fully control and an informal reality that was happening without them, and that the second option was not actually an option. It was just what was currently occurring. He said, "That is a very diplomatic way to say they had no choice." She said, "I tried to say it a way that left room for them to feel like they did." He looked at her for a long moment, then something shifted in his face. Not softening exactly, more like a decision being made in real time. He said he would need to speak with the ambassador, the real one, not the deputy. Myra said of course. He said it would take time. Humans were going to want specifics, not promises, not frameworks. The actual structural details of what this arrangement would look like, written down with accountability mechanisms that had teeth. She said she expected that. She said she had brought Rien's document in full if he wanted to start there. He said he did. She put it on the table. It was 200 pages. He did not look intimidated by it. He pulled it toward him, found the first page, and started reading in the unhurried way of someone who intended to read the whole thing. She ordered 2 cups of whatever he had been drinking. It turned out to be a Murath herbal blend that the kitchen stocked, because a Murath freighter pilot had introduced it to the cook 3 years ago, and the cook had decided to keep it on the menu. It was warm and faintly sweet, and she had never tasted anything like it. She drank it and waited while he read. And outside the wide window of Depot Veth, the ships came and went in their ordinary patterns, cargo and fuel, and the small movements of a galaxy that kept going whether or not the people who were supposed to be managing it had worked out their differences yet. It kept going, that was what it did. The agreement took 4 months to write and 7 minutes to sign. The signing happened at Depot Veth, which was Adez's suggestion, and which nobody had objected to for reasons that did not need to be stated. The wide hall with its permanent kitchen smell and its medium lighting and its tables that had seen 10,000 ordinary conversations was, he had said, exactly the right kind of place. Mara had agreed. Grand halls were for things you wanted to perform. This was something you wanted to actually do. The document was called the Orin Compact, named for the cluster rather than for any of the people involved, which had also been Adez's suggestion. He said he had a general preference for naming things after places rather than people because places did not develop opinions about their legacies. The compact created a new structure outside the existing council membership framework. Human operational teams, pilots, engineers, mediators, medical crews, and anyone else operating under the compact's flag would hold recognized status as compact agents. They could work in any space. They could respond to distress signals without authorization from local governing bodies. They could maintain infrastructure under a funding arrangement jointly contributed to by all council member species, proportional to usage. Every action taken under the compact flag had to be documented and filed within 60 days, publicly accessible, permanently recorded. The council retained no command authority over compact agents. Compact agents retained no council vote. The accountability structure ran through an independent oversight body with representatives from 7 species, not weighted by size or political standing. Rien had written that section. She had spent 6 weeks on it. When she presented it to the full council, one senior Sathiri counselor had asked her why humans would agree to external oversight with no vote. She said she thought the question reflected a misunderstanding of what humans had been doing for 2 centuries, which was working under no oversight at all, and doing it responsibly anyway. She said formal oversight with no vote was actually more rights than they had ever officially had. The chamber had been quiet after that. At the signing table in Depot Veth, 6 people sat down. Mara for the council, Ambassador Sira, the real one for humanity, a tall, quiet woman who had been managing the human withdrawal with the precision of someone who had always planned for this moment. Rien as lead architect of the compact's structural language, Adez as witness, and 2 others who had been invited specifically, whose invitations had been Rien's idea. Rolf came in from the Heth Belt region, where he had just finished another remote repair session with the Murath technician he had been coaching for months. He had not known why he was being invited until the day before. He read the invitation 3 times and then sat quietly for a while, the way people do when something they did without thinking turns out to have mattered in ways they had not tracked. Tula came from Outpost Zero, where she had recently been contracted by the Station Collective to run their regular supply route, a formalization of what she had been doing informally for years. She arrived with engine grease on her left hand that she had not fully managed to clean off, noticed it during the introductions, and decided not to apologize for it. The ambassador signed. Mara signed. Rien initialed the structural clauses on each page, which took the longest. Then the document was passed around the table for witnesses. Rolf signed in the careful handwriting of someone who was used to writing maintenance notes that other people needed to read clearly. Tula signed fast and definite, the same way she made decisions. The cook came out of the kitchen to see what the small gathering at the corner tables was about. Someone explained. He nodded once, in the manner of a person receiving information he finds entirely reasonable, and went back to the kitchen. 20 minutes later, he brought out a tray of small food items that nobody had ordered, a selection of things from every species that had a regular presence at the station, arranged without any particular ceremony on a plain station-issue tray. He set it on the table and said, "For when you are done with the papers." They were done with the papers. They ate. In the months that followed, the compact moved into the world the way real things move, imperfectly and usefully. The first official compact patrol logged a maintenance run to Darrow 7 and filed the report within 30 days. A compact medical team running a monitoring program on the Kreth border flagged an anomaly that the Public Health Office followed up on. A compact mediator sat in on a dispute between two out-here trading families and helped them reach an arrangement before they filed formal council complaints, and both families later said in their own reports that they had not felt managed, they had felt heard, which was a different thing. Pell, the 19-year-old from Outpost Zero who had flown the drone during the Dran incident, applied to a compact technical training program. She was accepted. She said in her application that she had learned something important during the engagement at Zero. She said she had learned that the distance between capable and not capable was usually just whether or not someone let you try. Rien kept her document, all 200 pages of it, but stopped adding to it after the signing. She had started it as evidence. She kept it as a record. She thought there was a difference and that the difference mattered. Asen, the Keithrani poet, went back to his home system after the residency ended. He wrote one more piece about Vareth Prime, shorter this time, only 800 words. It was about the maintenance note taped inside the water recycling panel that a cleaning crew had found 6 weeks after the signing, handwritten in 2 languages, explaining the bypass switch. The note was undated. The handwriting matched no current employee record. Whoever had written it had not signed it. He wrote that this was the part he kept thinking about. Not the compact, not the vote, not the ships at Outpost Zero or the cold noodles or the long table in the commissary at Depot Veth. The unsigned note in the panel. The thing done so far in advance that the person who did it had not known it would be needed, had not known if it would ever be found, had written it anyway because the system needed it and they were there, and it was the kind of people they were. He said he did not know a word in any language he spoke for what that was. He said if he ever found one, he would write that piece next. He never did find the word. Some things do not have one yet.